Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Murray Simser is my guest tonight, and we can talk a little bit later about his business, which is really quite fascinating. It's a algorithm app that tries to figure out what we're doing in politics, and because of that, he attended a conference that I really wanted to get him to report on called Next Gen 2025, which was in Ottawa last week, and it was about disrupting politics as we know it with AI. And numerous different speakers, and it was quite provocative. And so, Murray, tell us a little bit about the conference.
Yeah. Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me on again. I appreciate
My
it.
pleasure.
The conference itself was and these are extremely well attended these days. I think because politics is wild everywhere. There's nothing boring about politics, but this particular conference, headlined by some pretty well respected people in politics, attempted to bring together the next generation, okay, of politicians. That is the younger crowd that focuses on politics. And so you may or may not know this, but most of politics runs on 20 somethings. Okay, the entire politosphere, although populated by candidates of all age, generally speaking, their staff, the party, the people who run things. It's the youth that do this. It's what gives the energy to these political structures. And so the title itself, Next Gen, should sort of give you an indication of what this thing targeted. But the people that attended to talk to these were the who's who. Mr. Aislinn, Mr. Coletto, a variety of people. Mona Fortier, the now head whip or chief whip of the Liberal Party. Former cabinet minister and actually part of the executive now of the Liberal Party. These are the people that attended to speak to that next generation. And the subjects ranged, in my case, it was how AI is going to disrupt politics, but we also covered more normative topics that you would expect, like Canada-US relations and a variety of others.
And you told me that the headline on the paper the day that the conference started, talking about Canada-US relations, was a little bit provocative.
Yeah, it was. For those that don't know what the Hill Times is, the Hill Times is. It used to be a newspaper when I was a kid, but now it's a full-blown media outlet that newspaper, print, and online, etc. And it's one of the most successful news outlets in the country. And the reason that it's such a successful news outlet in the country and commands a very serious premium and subscription, that's $750 a year to get a subscription to it, and is that everybody who matters in politics in Canada anyway reads it. And that when a headline shows up on that page that says we can no longer trust the Americans. Let's just say that there was nobody in the room who wasn't shocked by that headline. Like, we were all taken aback by it. I think we've all understood recently that was the case. That the Americans have decided, for better or for worse, that it's worse, and they don't want a good relationship with us right now for a variety of internal and domestic and international reasons. But even though we knew that, nobody expected that title to be there. And our first keynote speaker was an American who was in the room, and you could tell that it was, even for her, living through what Trump is doing to sort of Canada, that was a tone that nobody expected, not even her. And she's an extremely sophisticated American. Okay, so
Her topic was navigating public affairs, a global perspective.
Yeah, and maybe you can tell your audience a little bit about sort of who she is based on that title, but the sort of thesis here is that she started off her thing with a disclaimer. Look, I was met with this unexpected news headline. I'm going to nevertheless try to make a great speech to you guys, and I hope you won't hate me. So it shows how our house is divided, North America, that is, and for 150 plus years, we have been peaceful. And the last time this happened, we had a problem during the Civil War with the Americans and the Treaty of Reciprocity. which was, as you'll recall, a free trade agreement. It's one of the major causes of the Civil Wars that, the southern states didn't like us, didn't like us trading with the North. And so at the end of the day, policy matters, worlds matter, and things change because policy and the world matters. And the experience that she had was probably quite stressful, I imagine.
And so, what do you think her message was? Was she refuting the headline and saying no, you can't?
Oh no, not at all. They sort of I think like everybody, Brian, everybody's sort of in suspended belief right now. I think we're in that intermediate period where if something really bad happens to you, you haven't really accepted it yet. So I actually think that her message was what most Canadians and Americans are doing right now, despite the fact that President Trump is trying to put us at each other's throats. I think Canadians and Americans inherently like each other. We're the same people. We're from the same family. We're like cousins or brothers or whatever metaphor you want to use. But the theory was uncomfort was her message. Like why that? You could see palpably the reaction that she had, and you could also see the resulting reaction that the whole crowd had when she said it. There was almost a bit of it was almost cathartic for her to say it because it cut the intensity that was in the room. Everyone was like, oh my God, an American's going to go up there and speak. And every table has 10 of these on it, or whatever the number was.
Do you think we can trust America today?
Americans, yes, meaning people. I love America, as you know. I lived there for a very long time. I give my life to defend it. Like my uncle before me, who was also in the American service, Purple Heart, Order of the Purple Heart, and all the rest. But my primary loyalty is to Canada. Okay, and the answer is I am questioning whether or not we can trust Americans these days. And knowing Americans intimately, I also know that the political system in America is such that if the president goes in a certain direction, Americans have a tendency to follow. Okay, and if Trump is truly going in this direction, and every day that goes by seems to indicate that he is, I don't think it's so much a question of trust. I think it's now a question of pure geopolitical self-interest. And from that standpoint, if I take that angle, Brian, I would suggest to you that the self-interest of Canada and the self-interest of the United States, that is the national interest of both countries, is no longer aligned. And I think we should be prepared for that.
Fascinating. The speaker that you were speaking of, her name is Mary Scott Greenwood, and she's the global head of government relations at Manulife Financial Corporation. We're going to take a break for some messages. When we come back, I'm going to ask Murray about a session that took place with David Coletto, founder of and chair of Abacus Data, on polling and how polling's changed, because that's one of the other topics that Murray's talked about that's gone through a radical transformation. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. My guest tonight is Murray Simser. He's the CEO of a Citizen, an app that is going to radicalize and change politics as we know it. Murray's going to talk about that a little bit later on. But right now, we're focusing on a conference that he went to, the Next Gen, the Future of Public Affairs in Ottawa last week. And polling, you said, was the topic of one of the sessions that was really quite interesting, as polling has changed, and you're saying that the gentleman who spoke is the one guy that's getting things right?
Yeah, I mean, look, David Coletto has risen to the top of the food chain in terms of accuracy of polls. Let's first talk about the polling industry, because I think before I make a comment about who's better, who's worse, let's talk about what polling is. There's really two kinds of polling. Okay, there's commission polling today. Let's go backwards. In the old days, quote unquote, you used to get polls, and they were generally, if they came out of a credible outfit, You paid good money to get that information, and those polls were reasonably rigorous. Okay, this is in the time of the pre-internet, where telephones were the primary mechanism of communication. Okay, and we all answered the phone back then. Okay, so you had very good polls from about the mid '90s to about 2012. You started to see a slow, very slow degradation in the quality of polls. Okay, at least public polls. Um, and the public polls, all of a sudden, about 2012 to 2015, collapsed in, broadly speaking, predictive value. And it wasn't for reasons people might expect. It's not that the polling changed. It's that the environment in which polling conducted was changed. Okay. By 2012, the great thing that happened was everybody had a smartphone. Okay. That's the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was everybody had social media. And what social media and smartphones did was plugged every human being into an information system that was unlimited in its scope, um, disturbing what would otherwise be the average sentiment that existed in society. Okay. And so now, with social media mass customizing, and by mass customizing, I mean the content you see on social media is different than mine. Everybody has a different feed. Okay. It's all different based on the algorithms that are present in the feed, which means that I'm being fed information that's ultimately going to modify my thinking, just as if I were reading books or other. The fact is, presentation of information modifies the way we think. And it got supercharged with social media. Now, in 2012, we spent about an hour, maybe hour and a half a day online, doing this sort of stuff. Today, that is 8 hours. Okay,
8 hours?
8 hours. People spend 8 hours on their devices every day, and by and large, most of that is social media. And so now enter polling. Okay, so I come back to your question about polling, and in the modern sense, polling changes, and so in that enters David Coletto's Abacus Data, who's done a terrific job of creating what I call the moderate poll, the poll that's neither for or against a candidate, which is the other kind of polling that exists today. Okay, which is commissioned polling or biased polling. That is, the liberals themselves will put out a poll, or conservatives put out a poll. That used to be the old way, but now they actually try to make those polls credible, even though they're not statistically accurate, because there are biases built into the way that they've built the data. And so buyer beware on polls is the short answer. And if you get good data and you're consistent, like Abacus is, you find that's of extreme value. Okay, but few and far between are pollsters that are getting this right.
What is Abacus doing right?
Well, I don't know. I don't know their internal structure, but I'll tell you their calls are pretty good. And I think that the measure of a pollster is hindsight. How did they do? I have a friend of mine, Mike Marzolini, who is on Citizens Board of Advisors. He was largely considered the greatest pollster of all time. Okay, and what I mean by that is he was Jean Chrétien's pollster, just as a means of reference. His predictions measured over a lifetime were in sort of the high 80s. Okay, like the accuracy was ridiculously good, and that was because he was good at his craft. Well, that was largely true of pollsters back then, meaning nobody would publish a poll that was crap, and so there was a certain expertise that was involved in the industry. It doesn't take expertise to do polling anymore. Okay, and therein lies the problem. Dunning-Kruger, anybody can do a poll? Like, no, anybody can't do a poll. The very way you ask the question affects the bloody poll. There's an art to this, but there's also a science. Okay, and so I think the answer is David just does a really good job of the science, does a really good job of keeping the biases out, and people like him because of it. Polling's about accuracy, nothing more. If you can't get accurate, then forget it.
I was surprised with the title of his session, which was Leveraging Polling for Advocacy, why bringing the public into your advocacy is more important than ever. That sounds like push polling. That sounds like the polling that you're talking about that actually isn't accurate. It's meant to advocate.
Well, I would sort of argue that's kind of true. If you compare it to the way polling But if you think about it from the standpoint of who the customers are of pollsters, most people think that pollsters spend their time publishing like a poll that goes on the Globe and Mail or the CBC or whatever news outlet. That's not what pollsters generally do. Okay, that they do some of that. But that's a small amount of a pollster's work. The lion's share of a pollster's work is what we call what I'll call internal polling, for lack of a better term. Okay, and this is, say, the Liberal Party hires a pollster to do private polling, stuff that won't be broadcast on the media. Okay, so this is, how do I target people? How do I get attention of, say, this audience that I'm trying to bake into, say a policy that I'm going to put out there. So if you think about who these quote unquote policy wonks are that buy that data, you're talking about lobbyists, you're talking about journalists, you're talking people who run great corporations, all the people that need to understand their audience will pay a commissioning fee or whatever they call it, I'm not sure, to get, say, Abacus to do a private poll. And that poll and the data in that poll, you're basically buying that for yourself. And there are different ways of paying for that sort of thing. But in the end, the lion's share of polling revenues, you'll never hear about what the results are of their work. And so when he talks about advocacy and baking polling into it, I believe he's talking about the business model of polling.
Polls have changed fairly dramatically for political parties federally in the last month, where the Liberals a month ago, or maybe a month and a half ago, were dead in the water, and now they're neck and neck with the Conservatives, with Chrystia Freeland or nobody leading the party, and actually ahead of the Conservatives with Mark Carney leading the party. How can things change so dramatically so quickly?
Well, they can't. The fact is, there are two universes of polls in sort of the liberal realm. Okay, right now, if we look at the two worlds are, the first world is the one you described. Okay, where the liberals have come from nowhere. They were at sort of 12 to 18%, depending on the polls, when it was like the before Trudeau resignation, and that was representative of just people had had enough. I mean, Canadians don't like their politicians sticking around much more than a decade, at leadership level. And so everybody expected that. But, okay, then all of a sudden, Trudeau resigned, Trump was elected, and leadership was announced. And so now you had this what I'll call this reinterest that showed up again in the Liberal Party. So you had a natural bump from the I'm disgusted mentality, where you had fully 3/4 of Liberals were turning away from Liberals. And now that number has recovered significantly. The majority of Liberals now intend to vote Liberal, which is about, instead of 2/3 being against voting Liberal, now 2/3 Liberals intend to vote Liberal. So there has been a correction back to what I call the pre-disgust numbers, okay, the one that forced Trudeau out of power. Okay, and let's be fair to him. He took it on the chin and did it, and he's gone off and done his thing. Good for him. Now, there's a second group of polls that say, one, they are slowly climbing and they are improving their situation, but they sit at around 20, 25, 30% deficit relative to the Conservatives. That's one group of polls, and that's most of what you're seeing. But now, you also had early on a whole set of other polls that said what you just described. That is, neck and neck with the Conservatives in a variety of different ways, different levels, Freeland, Carney, all this business. But there has been a very big debate about the quality of those polls and whether or not these are commissioned polls that are done on purpose to sort of, how do I say it properly, catalyze or spark a revolution that will get people back into the Liberal Party. So I'm not sure that that's the accurate polling. And I'm going to say one last thing generically about polling. And that is, polling primarily targets people who are not young. Okay? No young person takes a poll, ever. Okay? Period. It just doesn't happen. And if they do, it's some kind of a nonsense social media poll, click, 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 that doesn't have any statistical value because there are no controls in place. So polling is aging out, not because it's irrelevant, but because the people who are willing to take polls are by and large looking for attention. So on that subject, I'll say polling in every election in the last decade, as you've seen, has been largely wrong. Canada, the United States, Europe, and that's getting worse, not better.
And at the same time, turnout's going down. So the people that show up are the key question, not just the populace in general.
That's right.
Another session was about communications in a shifting landscape from prorogation to election readiness, and you had some really interesting people on that, and from different political parties. Tell me how communications has changed.
Well, let's go through sort of the history of it. If you think about how, let's say, pre-internet communication worked, you had a news cycle. Okay. And that news cycle was largely the newspaper in the morning and then the live news at night and the drive time radio. Okay. That was how we got our news. There were three sources: print, radio, television. Okay. So, and television had a couple of them. Radio had a couple of them. So you had the drive time into work, the drive time back to work. Then when you got home and had your dinner, then you watched the evening news. And then if the kids were asleep, then you watched the 11. The internet came along and changed that into, and simultaneously we had the quote unquote 24-hour news cycle that came with CNN and all the rest of these in the late 90s through satellite and cable television. The internet arrives and destabilizes that. Okay. And what I mean by destabilizes that, I mean very specifically that the old authority polls, like if you think about the anchors on the television or the great writers in the newspapers or the great talk show hosts that were on, say, talk time radio in the morning or the afternoon, these were highly contended for positions, meaning they were well paid. Everybody wanted them. You worked hard your whole life. You might end up being an anchor on, say, the CBC or CTV or something like this. And the same is true of working for, say, the Toronto Star or the Ottawa Citizen or a variety of other papers. And if you were really lucky, you could become some kind of a celebrity with that. But the internet tore down all that authority barrier to the provision of information. Okay, so when communication happened prior to the internet, there was a pretty clear target about how you were going to get this done. You had to have quality information. If you wanted Peter Mansbridge to talk to you, you better have a good PR person to get you the introduction. There was a whole industry that built up around how that worked. Okay. Now the internet comes along and there are no barriers to entry anymore, anywhere. Anybody can be a reporter. All they have to do is pull up their YouTube account and start recording a video and post it on the internet. And what that did was flood the information space, okay, with orders of magnitude more information than was generated by the prior communication environment, that is the newspaper, the TV, and the radio, okay? When that happened, it's exactly the same thing that happened when the printing press came along in Europe and destabilized the magistrate and the bishop, which was the only media up to that point. Hear ye on a Friday, and then Sunday, the bishop from the pulpit. That was the only information, but there were no libraries. The printing press allowed anybody to present information temporally in the future, but also at distance, because you could send paper, with a horse or whatever it was to go thing. That gave us 130 years of war in Europe. Okay, the destabilization was that great. This is the whole Protestant Revolution. The concept of the nation state was born out of that. The concept of parliament was born out of that. These are not small changes. And so I argue that the communications world, as you've asked, has changed even more today than had the printing press done back in the day. And remember, the printing press irrevocably altered the world. Now, I don't have to tell you that things are changing pretty rapidly right now. And what we're seeing from Trump and Europe and the fact that we were against a quote unquote dictator, a Russian dictator, and now he's invited to the G7. I don't have to tell you that things are changing faster than they ever have. And so a communications person in that environment, if you think about that panel, the main thing that they're trying to get across is whatever message they've been hired to deliver. Now, can you imagine how hard that is in a world where billions of pieces of information are competing for the eyeballs of people on 6 algorithms? That's the nature of communications today in the political game. And it's a really hard game. And this is, of course, the reason that we have such aggressive, mean, unclean politics today, because the only way to cut through in a message is to be absolutely toxic and damaging and rude and emotional. This is the only thing that will rank you up on an algorithm on social networks. And so you're starting to see it in politicians. Donald Trump will tear down the entire Western alliance because of it, because it serves his interests politically and domestically. And that everybody needs to be ready for.
So how do Canadian political parties get ready for it?
No, I think you're seeing. I think you're seeing not very well is the sort of short answer. Some political parties are leaning into it. They take on this sort of populist view of things, and it's worked quite well for the parties on the right. It's also and most left leaning people will say to me, well, yeah, the right people are bad, but the people that are taking most advantage of that right now are not conservatives. It's the sort of liberals. And if you want to look at who's taking advantage of the destabilization and the space this creates for people, it's those with very aggressive messages. So I live at Bloor and Yonge in Toronto, which is our main crossroads for those of you not in Canada. This is our Times Square-ish kind of section. The protests always take place there. And I have to listen to this sort of every day. And if you look at the intensity of these protests, this is now translating this nonsense into real life. Every single day, there's somebody out there protesting, threatening people's lives. I'm going to wreck things. I'm going to blow stuff up. It's absolutely disgusting behavior that is now pervading our societies. And people think it's normal because they see it on here every day of the week. And when you normalize that kind of behavior, it translates into real world consequences, just like it did with the printing press.
Unbelievable. Then the session you were on was AI in public affairs, examining the application of AI in the political landscape. Let's take a break and come back in 2 minutes and chat with Murray Simser about how AI is changing politics and public affairs. Fascinating conversation today, Murray. Thanks. Stay with us, everybody. We're back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Murray Simser from Citizen is my guest tonight. He was on a panel at a conference called NextGen, the Future of Public Affairs, last week. And he was on a panel about how AI is changing public affairs and politics. Murray Simser, how's AI changing politics and public affairs?
Not very well, I'm saying, but quite consistently. That's the reality of it is. Let's sort of understand the consequences of AI. Everybody's sort of heard of generative AI. If you haven't, you've probably heard terms like OpenAI or ChatGPT or these sorts of things. These, generally speaking, are language models that allow people to do things better, faster, and more efficiently. So, for instance, I could open up Claude, or I could open up Gemini, or any number of other of these things, and I could generate all kinds of content. Okay, I could even say generate 1,000 pieces of content and then stick it into the delivery system that auto posts it onto my social medias. The implication of that is that content being generated for politicians, that is all the stuff you see online, all the stuff you see when they're talking, all the talking points, everything that they do, and in fact, all the ads they place and all the posts they make can be impacted by AI, because at every level of that, AI is a tool that's used by everybody. Now, today, it's sort of piecemeal because people are just coming to terms with what AI is capable of doing. Okay, so, but as that stack, the distance between the politician themselves and the information provided on behalf of that politician by the first party or by third parties, that entire distribution system of information, whether they're related to the politician or they just support them on their own, will all become an automated system in, say the next decade. And by automated, I mean somebody who works in politics will have AI decide all of that, where to place it, what to say, how to say it, when to say it, why to say it, who to target, how to target. All of this will be done automatically, and it will be something that once released, you won't really have direct control over. So, for instance, in the old days when we were kids, if you bought an ad in the Toronto Star, there was a whole process that went along with picking that. Okay. In the AI world, it's algorithms that are picking that. So you don't necessarily know where stuff ends up, but you do know the measured effect of where it ended up. And so if you can imagine a universe where the news cycle has become 0 seconds long, okay, as compared to, say, 40 years ago, 24-hour news cycle, you understand the difference here. There will be no daylight at all between a politician and what is spread around the world when a politician speaks, okay? In other words, in the future, what you should expect is policy is made when a politician speaks, all right? And that's...
Well, that's certainly the case with Donald Trump.
This is exactly it, but it's not the case, say, in a parliamentary system, okay? But it will be, because all of the processes that make it make it easy will also mean that all of the people who work between the delivery of the information and the politician, they go away. Okay? Now, this is really important because it means that the measure of the politician will be sort of a wave that spreads out like you drop a pebble in a pond. That wave spreading out from the politician will be the communication strategy of the person. It will be the way the messages are decided. There will be no human involved in this thing. And the AI will likely take on the persona of, say, whatever politician, say it was me, will take on my persona, will take on my personality, will take into account everything I think and do and believe, and it will modify my positions as I go. And that universe is not 50 years away. It's already here for those who are gifted at the use of it. Eventually, everybody will use it as it becomes easier and more accessible.
So what policy will be made by AI? Speeches will be made by AI? Will we have actual avatars doing debates for us and making speeches for us?
Yes, we will. In fact, right now, let's just take a change that'll take place, okay? A politician can only be in one place at a time, all right? And that assumes that you can only physically go to one room. You know, we don't live in a multiverse as far as we know yet, or we can't prove it. So, Justin Trudeau or Mark Carney or Mona Fortier, none of them are able to be in more than one place at a time. Okay. But what if they could? Okay. What would be the difference in your mind?
You're saying
where if a stage had a holographic system, okay, which exists today, this isn't novelty, where I was walking around the stage and I was having this exact conversation, say, with an audience, and I looked and felt real. What would be the difference? Now, you could imagine a universe where the prime minister or prime minister candidate shows up to every event in the country at the same time on the same day and talks about different things to every group at the same time.
But it's not him.
The potential of this.
It's not him. It's an AI.
Is it not him? This is the question, okay? This is the future we're going to have to grapple with, because in a universe where you are primarily physical in structure, meaning the universe we all live in, 3 dimensions and hard surfaces and a computer screen and all these sorts of things, we have physical limitations, all right? Now, in another future, every single person in the country is going to want the same level of attention from the prime minister. Why shouldn't they have it? It's this sort of stuff that you have to ask. And the key is this. You have to build up to be able to do what I just described, which is make an avatar of Murray exactly like Murray, or at least as good as Murray in any circumstance. That avatar has to be informed by a large body of data, okay? And so it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to be able to create copies of Murray that are, 99% me for a little bit, but we're almost there, David. Okay. We're so close to this. I'm talking about a year or two. We're not talking a decade or two. We're talking about it's just a perfection of the technology now. And the fact of the matter is, let's say I got sick today and I couldn't attend this radio show. I could send my digital avatar. And it would be no bloody different than what you're seeing here. But all the personality, the cuckoo-ness of Murray, the craziness of his statements, all that would be present. And the real question to ask is that Murray? And does it matter? And I think that's the best answer, because right now I don't have a great answer to your question.
Who's working on this?
Everybody. When you think about quote unquote Silicon Valley, okay, most of the tip of the spear in technology today is focused on advanced AI modeling. Okay, or the underlying data itself. Okay, so modeling an AI, it means to make the AI do something useful. Okay, so anybody can have a large language model. Large language models, as you recently saw, it cost $10. I actually think the most recent large language model was made for $5. Okay, 2 years ago, OpenAI's was multi-billion dollars to train the same qualitative output. That is an accurate AI. That's the quality that we're talking about. Like somebody, you ask it a question, you get an answer that's on balance accurate. We can build those now for a fin. Okay. So large language models is just the baseline. It's a nothing technology in the end. It's an enabler, sort of like website or internet server or these sort of things. They become infrastructure in the long run. The differentiation will have to happen outside of that, and that's where a lot of the exciting stuff is happening. So, for instance, Citizen, this company that, all my tchotchke dudes that I have behind me here to remind me to get up in the morning to keep building my company. That company augments AI with a private and proprietary data set. Now, data is what makes, if you have unique data, then your AI knows something that nobody else knows, okay? And you can do stuff with that data that nobody else knows. There's a reason you're seeing every large language model provider out there being sued nowadays, because copyright or whatever it is, the artists are suing them because they took a catalog of music that was publicly available and said, show me all the patterns inside the music, and then bring that into my knowledge base. And the creators of that music, like, you stole. Okay, this is going to go on for the next 20 or 30 years, these fights. The only way to make an AI that's meaningfully different than anything else and that won't be sued, frankly, is have your own data. And Citizen aims to digitize the entire relationship between a human being and their government, period. And with that data set that nobody else has, it makes us a very much different type of AI company than your average AI company that's competing in sort of a red ocean of people competing with them to fight over what amounts to who can more accurately answer a bloody question put into a chatbot. They are all going to hit there is a maximum level of accuracy that you can have in information science within a large language model, and they're all more or less there. Every large language model can get to about 99% without even trying. To get from 99 to 100% is the hard part in a large language model, and that's just a constant game of trying to increase the accuracy, and it's a diminishing rate of return. Okay, so which means differentiation in AI has to be somewhere else, not in whether or not it can answer accurately or act like a human or sound cuckoo. Fact of the matter is, AI changes absolutely everything. Everything.
AI changes absolutely everything.
Everything.
Are you worried? Are you scared?
Oh, Christ, no. I'm so excited. I've been working to build this world since I was a kid. Okay, remember, people were scared, Brian, when the internet came along. All right, oh, this is going to change everything. It's going to wreck the world. We're going to lose our jobs. The same crap that's being said about AI was being said when the internet came on. Do you remember all the people who worked in, say, banks and the front line at a teller? Oh, we're all going to replace those with bank machines. And then the internet came, oh, we're going to replace it with internet banking, and we're going to have these apps. Simple fact of the matter is there are as many bloody branches today as there ever were. And we've got more jobs in banking than we ever had. And the fact of the matter is things change. But are they going to change for the better? And this is the real question. It's not about whether or not the change is going to be hard. Change is always hard. Okay. I don't think anybody who grew up in the 40s thought the jet age was easy. Okay. Oh, the world was collapsing, all these weird people showing up in our country. Like everybody has their crosses to bear. Okay. As people. But our job as people is to adapt. Okay. And quit the bloody whining and do it. So you have two choices. You can either love change or you can be miserable about it. I choose the former. And as a consequence, I have a tendency to get ahead of the technology and try to understand its impacts and create companies out of it, create opportunity out of that change, rather than sit around and complain that I came from a better time.
But Murray, every party of the right, every populist party of the right around the world seems to today be, trying to make the past great again, and move backwards, get rid of globalization, bring manufacturing back to America. Think about those industrial jobs that have been lost. Turn the clock backwards. So isn't most people disagreeing with you?
In what sense? That they don't like change?
They don't like change. They want to go back to the way it was 10, 15, 25 years ago.
I would argue that that's the purpose of conservative parties or right-wing parties, is to always lament that change has come and to bring us backwards. Look, what is right and left, I think, is the right answer to the question. The left's job in a society is to show that we've atrophied in too many places and we need fixing and correcting. That's the job in a liberal, democratic, capital society. The job of the progressive left is to come up with new shit. Okay. And to invent new things and to tell, frankly, the conservative people in society, you're too bloody conservative. We need to improve this. Good examples are like women's suffrage, universal access to services, human rights for everybody. These are all progressive ideas that the left has brought to bear. In the same way, conservative ideas, their purpose and job in society is so that society doesn't take on too much risk too often. Okay. So both sides, and they advocate for it was better in the past. And I remember when I was a kid, and, it was a better time, make America great again. It's not the first time make America or make country, name your country has been used. That slogan is as old as time immemorial. Okay? It's not new. So I don't really see things like in a are they mad or are they not mad? I see it in more of a continuum that is an important place to be. In the marketplace for ideas, as a great thinker, Peter Biro, who you've had on your show, once articulated, it's not so much about whether or not the left or right is ascended. It's more about whether or not a dialogue is taking place in that marketplace for ideas, so that the left and the right are sort of testing each other. Now, having said that, all right, the all parties have adopted AI, and when I say adopted it, I mean they might as well be the early adopters of the technology. Okay, because politics, as you know, is an incredibly intense world. Okay, if you can find an advantage in any way, you'll grab it, and you have to behave that way. That is the way you must behave, or you will lose. All right, so although the conservatives, you might sort of predict that they don't necessarily like AI, in point of fact, they love it, and it's paid them a great dividend. Look at the results that right-leaning parties have had, say, in this last year. It's an astonishing turn of events that's taken place. The entire Western alliance, NATO itself, NORAD between Canada and the United States is fracturing. And is it fracturing because of AI, or is AI just a tool being used to fracture it? I think that'll be debated by historians for some time.
Murray Simser, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Murray Simser from Citizen. Welcome Welcome back, everyone. I've got Murray Simser from Citizen on tonight, and he's been chatting about this conference that took place about the future of public affairs called Next Gen. And we've been talking about AI, we've been talking about polling, we've been talking about trust. Murray, what did people think when they were leaving that conference room after such a day of conversations comparable to what we've had?
Well, yeah, I think there was a certain amount of happiness that they were surrounded by other people that were thinking and asking the same questions. It was not obvious to me that one side or the other, cared much. I think both the conservatives and the liberals in that room were all of the same mind. This is a really big change, and we have to rethink how we do public affairs. That's the short version, I think. We gave them enough food for thought about what's coming and the changes that are afoot and how the industry itself is going to completely change in the next 2 to 3 years. And I mean completely change. And I actually said this, get ready for it. And that was my message. And I think they took it. They were strong. They were nervous. Some people said I freaked them right out. But at the end of the day, they said they appreciated it.
Murray Simser, thanks so much for joining us. I think you've been extremely provocative in making all of us think about what the future of public affairs is. I think the idea of hundreds, if not thousands, of AI Donald Trumps or Justin Trudeau's and their avatars speaking to us personally with AI generating their ideas and their policies right away is a little bit scary, but daunting. I think your description of the change that we're going through right now, that we went through with the internet, that we're going through right now, being comparable to the 100 years or so after the invention of the printing press and how dramatic a change in society that was, is an interesting historical analogy that I'm going to have to think about a little bit more, and how many things changed with your comments about the Protestant work ethic, the change of who could talk, not just the bishop and the magistrate. And I think that your comments about polling and the accuracy of polling and how impossible it is to get young people to actually take a poll really calls into question, what we look at every day when we're watching the horse race and thinking that is a predictor of where we're going to be. And I guess what you're saying is it's not a great predictor anymore, or else we have to be worried about it. But bottom line, my biggest concern is everything you've talked about going to change turnout? Because the turnout in the last provincial election was 40%. Turnout in the last municipal election was in the 20s and 30%. We got to do something if we want to motivate people to actually get out and play a role in our democracy. And, I think it was William F. Buckley who said he'd rather have the first 2,000 people in the Boston phone book make decisions than everyone in Washington. I think if we don't have people that actually play a role in our democracy, we don't have a democracy anymore. And so we've got to do something that gets and motivates people to get involved, get informed, get involved, and to actually vote. So, Murray,
That's my job, David.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Buddy.
That's our show tonight, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I remind you, I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock. I'm an old mind. I'm the drive home guy. I'm long form interviews. I'm on AM radio, but I also put it on social media. So maybe there's still an opportunity for me to have a little bit of influence on what you're thinking. Tune in anytime, either at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca, or you can check out all my videos and my podcasts on podcast servers, YouTube, and all social media outlets. Thanks. Good night, everybody. Murray, appreciate it.